Imagine you are working in an office right now, or maybe you're commuting, just going about your day, and you feel pretty secure in your career path.
Right, you think you know the landscape,
Exactly. You know your industry, you know who your main competitors are, and you feel like you generally understand the rules of the game.
but you probably don't.
Yeah, you probably don't. Because our mission today is to completely shatter and then, rebuild how you understand that game. We are going to entirely upend your understanding of globalization.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. We're doing this by unpacking a fascinating excerpt from a book titled The Great Convergence. And honestly, it fundamentally rewrites the narrative on how global trade actually works.
Because the old rule book you might be relying on, it has essentially been thrown out the window.
Completely tossed out.
Right. This text lays out the massive, truly massive geopolitical and economic shifts of the last 30 years. It explains the sudden, explosive rise of emerging markets.
Which we've all seen happen.
Exactly. And ultimately, it reveals why you can no longer predict if your specific job or even your specific industry is safe anymore.
Yeah, the stakes here are incredibly high.
They are. Because this framework, it explains the volatile world we are navigating right now.
I mean, for decades, we have casually thought of globalization as just, stuff moving across oceans.
Right, cargo ships.
Yeah, giant cargo ships stacked with colorful shipping containers. We
Right.
think about trade routes or debates over tariffs on foreign steel.
Physical stuff.
Exactly. But the core argument we are looking at in this deep dive is that around the year 1990, the rules completely flipped.
Completely turned on their head.
The very nature of globalization transformed from a trade of physical goods into this hyper-complex transfer of knowledge.
Which is wild, and it explains so many of the geopolitical tensions we see today.
Oh, absolutely.
It explains why certain nations skyrocketed out of poverty at an unprecedented rate, while others just, well, totally stagnated.
Left completely behind.
Yeah. It clarifies why the political climate in wealthy nations has become so incredibly tense regarding international trade. And it shows how the actual ground-level mechanics of economic competition have moved away from the nation-state.
It's drilled all the way down to the individual firm, right?
Exactly. The individual company.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can truly understand why the global economy was turned upside down in 1990, we really have to understand the centuries-long setup.
The historical context is everything.
Right, the setup that created the modern world order in the first place. You can't grasp the shock of the reversal without understanding that historical buildup.
So to understand that buildup, we have to look at the three massive friction points that historically kept the world from operating as a single, seamless market.
The text calls these the three cascading constraints of distance.
Yes, the three cascading constraints. You can think of them as the three distinct costs that dictate how human beings do business with one another.
Yep.
So there's the cost of moving goods, the cost of moving ideas, and the cost of moving people.
Goods, ideas, and people. Got it.
Right. And for the vast majority of human history, prior to about 1820, all three of those costs were astronomically high.
Like restrictively high.
Exactly. If you lived in a farming village, you consumed what your village produced. You wore clothes spun from local materials. You ate food grown within, like, a few miles of your house.
You used tools forged by the local blacksmith.
Yeah. Production and consumption were forcibly bundled together. Moving anything across a long distance by, horse-drawn cart or a wind-powered sailing ship was just too expensive.
And too slow.
Way too slow to be a regular part of daily economic life.
But then we hit the 1820s.
The 1820s change everything. We get the steam engine, the proliferation of railroads, the invention of steamships.
And a sustained period of relative global peace, right?
Yes, that's crucial. Suddenly, that first constraint, the cost of moving physical goods, starts to plummet.
It just drops.
Plummets. And this triggers what the text calls the first unbundling. For the first time in human history, production and consumption are allowed to separate geographically.
And the ripple effect of this first unbundling is absolutely fascinating to visualize.
Oh, it's incredible.
You have, say, a middle-income British person in the 19th century, and suddenly, because it's cheap to move bulk goods across oceans, their entire daily reality changes.
That whole world expands.
Yeah. This person could sit down to a meal and eat bread baked with wheat imported from the United States, drink tea brewed from Chinese leaves, sweeten it with sugar harvested in Jamaica.
And set all of this on a tablecloth woven from Indian cotton.
It must have felt like absolute magic at the time.
It was a profound reorganization of daily life, but, and this is a big but, we have to look at the massive imbalance this created.
Right.
While the cost of moving physical goods plummeted thanks to steam power, the cost of moving complex ideas and the cost of moving human beings stayed incredibly high.
Because you still couldn't just call someone up.
Exactly. And this imbalance triggers what historians refer to as the Great Divergence.
The Great Divergence. Okay, walk me through that.
Well, markets were expanding globally, meaning a factory could sell its finished products to anyone, anywhere on Earth. But the actual industry, the factories, the engineers, the innovators.
The people designing the stuff.
That's right, the people designing the products they had to physically huddle together. Communication was still incredibly slow and expensive.
So if you wanted to iterate on a design or fix a mechanical flaw, you couldn't send an email.
No emails in 1850.
Right. You had to be in the same room, or at least the same city, to collaborate effectively.
Which meant that while the finished products could cross oceans, the knowledge required to make those products was trapped. It was trapped in local clusters.
And historically, for a variety of complex reasons, that industrial clustering happened in the North.
Yes, specifically what we now call the Group of Seven, or the G7 nations.
Which is the U.S., Germany, Japan, France, Britain, Canada, and Italy.
Exactly, those 7.
So it's like opening a massive global highway for delivery trucks. But the instruction manuals and the engineers who actually know how to build the products are still stuck in traffic back in London or New York.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yes. The delivery trucks can go anywhere, but the knowledge stays locked in a few highly guarded geographic pockets.
And that dynamic created a self-perpetuating spiral of innovation and wealth in those specific G7 nations.
Because everyone was clustered together.
Right. Because all the engineers and thinkers were in places like Detroit or Manchester, they innovated much faster. And because ideas were still too costly to move, those incredible innovations stayed strictly within their national borders.
Wow.
This caused a massive, almost unimaginable shift in global power. It completely displaced the ancient civilizations of Asia and the Middle East.
Who had essentially dominated the world economy for, what, 4 millennia?
Yes. 4,000 years of economic dominance wiped out by this new dynamic.
That's staggering.
From 1820 all the way up to 1990, the G7's share of global income soared from about 20% to almost 66%.
2/3 of the entire world's wealth.
Concentrated in the hands of just a few nations. All because they could ship their finished goods globally while keeping the underlying ideas locally.
Which sets the stage for the massive disruption. Because if that global highway for goods created the G7's absolute economic dominance for nearly 2 centuries...
Something earth-shattering had to happen to reverse it.
Right. And this brings us to what the text calls the shocking share shift.
And shocking almost feels like an understatement when you look at the actual numbers.
I mean, from 1990 onward, a full century's worth of the G7's economic rise was reversed in just 2 decades.
Just 20 years.
In 20 years, their massive share of world income plummeted right back down to 1914 levels. 100 years of gradual, entrenched wealth accumulation undone in the blink of an eye.
The velocity of that change is staggering. And the catalyst for it was the information and communication technology revolution.
The ICT revolution.
Exactly. Around 1990, humanity finally figured out how to shatter the second constraint.
The cost of moving ideas.
Yes. We developed the internet, we laid undersea fiber optic cables, and scaled up massive computing power.
And suddenly, moving complex data or coordinating intricate manufacturing tasks.
It became practically free and instantaneous. Sharing blueprints across the globe was suddenly trivial.
And this triggers the second unbundling, which is the international separation of factories.
Right. Before 1990, you had to build your entire factory in, say, Stuttgart or Nagoya. So the designers, the supply chain managers, and the assembly line workers could physically talk to each other to solve problems.
But with the ICT revolution, firms in the rich North realized they no longer needed to keep the assembly line in their backyard.
They didn't. They could tap into the vast pools of much cheaper labor in the developing South.
The catch, however, is that modern manufacturing isn't simple. You can't just call up a facility in a developing nation and say, hey, build a modern combustion engine for us.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
The offshore factories had to mesh flawlessly with the onshore ones. If a highly specific automotive part was being made in Mexico or China, it had to fit perfectly into the final assembly process back in the US or Germany. down to the millimeter.
So to make this decentralized system work, the G7 firms couldn't just send capital, right?
No, they had to actively send their marketing, managerial, and technical know-how along with the jobs.
They essentially had to export their own brilliance.
They did.
There's a sports analogy in the text that really clarifies this shift. The old globalization, that first unbundling where we just move goods, was like two soccer teams sitting down and swapping players.
Right, traditional trade.
Yeah. You trade a player you don't need for a player you do need. Both teams get a little better. They both optimize their rosters. I'll trade you my American wheat for your Chinese tea.
Exactly. But the new globalization, the second unbundling, operates on an entirely different logic.
It's not swapping players.
No. It's like the head coach of the league's absolute best team flying over on the weekends to intensively train the worst team in the league.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting because the math gets complicated for me here.
How so?
Well, if a G7 firm offshores its manufacturing, it essentially has to offshore its technical know-how to make that foreign factory run effectively.
Right.
But historically, transferring your highly guarded intellectual property to a foreign workforce is a fast track to creating your own direct competitors.
It usually is.
So why would a G7 company just hand over its secret playbook? Isn't that corporate suicide?
That is the essential question. The key is understanding how they manage the flow of that information.
Okay.
Because this was absolutely not a moment of global altruism.
Yeah.
It wasn't some kumbaya moment. G7 firms were acting out of pure, ruthless corporate self-interest.
They didn't just upload their entire engineering database to a public server.
Definitely not. They heavily fragmented their supply chains.
Yeah.
They might teach a factory in one country exactly how to manufacture a highly specific microchip.
And a factory in another country how to build a proprietary battery?
It-
So no single offshore factory ever gets the complete instruction manual for the whole product.
Precisely that. The overarching blueprint, the final integration knowledge, remains locked down in the corporate headquarters in Seattle or Munich.
That's brilliant, honestly.
It is. Furthermore, they kept this technical knowledge strictly within the confines of their own secure internal corporate networks and trusted subsidiaries.
So they combined their elite G7 know-how with developing nation labor to create this high-tech, low-wage combination.
Which allowed them to absolutely dominate global markets. The coach gets to profit massively from training the other team, while ensuring that other team can never quite win the championship on their own.
But the undeniable side effect is this massive north-to-south flow of applied technical knowledge that had previously been locked up in northern factories.
It leaked out, yes.
Which brings up a glaring mystery for me. If ideas can suddenly travel via fiber optic cables instantly to anywhere on Earth, and these massive multinational companies are aggressively looking for cheap labor,
Right.
then shouldn't every single developing nation have experienced an economic miracle?
You would think so?
I mean, every poor country has cheap labor. But that isn't what happened. We aren't talking about a rising tide lifting all boats. We're talking about a highly exclusive club.
What's fascinating here is how geographically concentrated this shift actually was.
Yeah.
The G7's loss in manufacturing share didn't spread evenly across the global south.
Not at all.
Almost all of those new factories, those jobs, and that resulting wealth went to just 6 developing nations. They are categorized as the industrializing 6, or the I-6.
Those 6 being China, Korea, India, Poland, Indonesia, and Thailand.
Just those 6.
Out of the dozens of developing nations, just 6 absorbed the shockwave of the second unbundling. And China was the undisputed heavyweight of the group, skyrocketing from having about 3% of the world's manufacturing capacity to almost 20%.
In a phenomenally short time.
The rest of the developing world was largely left sitting in the waiting room during this specific factory boom.
The reason it was so narrow comes down to the third constraint.
Okay, the third constraint.
Right. We lower the cost of moving goods with steam. We lower the cost of moving ideas with fiber optics. But that third constraint is the cost of moving people.
The face-to-face constraint.
Yes, because even with sophisticated emails, CAD files, and video conferencing, establishing and running complex manufacturing still requires human beings to physically oversee things.
You still need someone to walk the factory floor.
Exactly. Senior managers, quality assurance technicians, specialized engineers, they still need to visit these offshore factories regularly.
To troubleshoot complex machinery or audit processes.
And to train staff on subtle, tacit knowledge that simply cannot be conveyed in an email. and a highly paid G7 manager's time is extremely expensive.
So it's like running a fully remote company today, but realizing your boss still insists on doing quarterly site visits?
Exactly.
You're only going to hire remote teams that are a direct, easy 2-hour flight away. If a team is a 14-hour flight with 3 layovers, they are out of the running, leaving everyone else out in the cold.
It doesn't matter how cheap their labor is, because the travel time for your executives destroys any cost savings.
Oh, wow.
And that dynamic dictated the new map of the world. To economize on the time cost of moving people, these new offshore factories clustered near the existing G7 industrial powerhouses.
So they popped up in places that were just a short, direct flight from Detroit, Stuttgart, and Nagoya.
It perfectly explains why manufacturing shifted to Mexico for the US, to Poland for Germany, and to Thailand for Japan.
It's all about flight radii. Now, looking at that I-6 list, India stands out as the exception.
They do.
They aren't exactly a short hop from the traditional manufacturing hubs of North America or Western Europe.
Yeah.
How do they get into the club?
Well, India succeeded by engaging in these international production networks primarily through services rather than physical goods.
Oh, okay.
They focused on IT, call centers, software development, and in those specific service sectors, the need for frequent physical face-to-face interaction is significantly lower than it is when you're trying to, calibrate heavy machinery on an assembly line.
That makes a lot of sense. The physical friction is lower in code than in steel.
Precisely.
Now, even though it was only 6 countries that captured this factory boom, there was a secondary ripple effect in the text called the commodity supercycle.
Right. It wasn't just the I-6 that felt this.
The rest of the developing world wasn't completely isolated from the boom then.
Not entirely, but they experienced it through a totally different mechanism. Those I-6 nations, particularly China and India, happen to house about half of humanity.
Right, massive populations.
So when they rapidly industrialized, hundreds of millions of people transitioned from agrarian lifestyles into new urban centers. They started building megacities, laying thousands of miles of high-speed rail.
Buying household appliances, driving cars.
Exactly, which requires a staggering amount of raw materials.
An almost incomprehensible amount, I'm sure.
Yes. This massive, sudden industrialization sparked an unprecedented global demand for oil, copper, iron ore, and soybeans. This created the commodity supercycle.
Okay, so picture a mining town in Chile suddenly seeing billions of dollars in infrastructure investment simply because a new city is being erected in China.
That's exactly what happened. This supercycle lifted up many commodity exporting nations across Africa and South America.
So they were completely untouched by the factory boom itself?
Right, they didn't get the high-tech factories or the knowledge transfer, but they experienced a massive economic boom simply by selling the raw materials required to feed those I-6 factories.
Okay, so we have this massive, complex shift in the global map. But this isn't just about macroeconomics, GDP charts, and international shipping routes.
No, it's highly personal.
This shift fundamentally changes the daily reality and the career trajectory for individual workers, including you, the listener.
This is where the macroeconomic theory collides with daily life. The new globalization operates at a much finer degree of resolution than the old kind.
A finer degree of resolution, what does that mean exactly?
Well, under the old globalization of the 20th century, whole sectors essentially won or lost together. If it suddenly became cheaper to import steel from abroad, the entire domestic steel sector suffered.
Right. The floor workers, the shift managers, the accountants at the steel plant, the local HR department, they were all in the same boat.
Exactly. You can look at a nation's economy and clearly identify its sunset industries that were dying and its sunrise industries that were booming.
Which gave workers a sense of predictability.
But you cannot do that anymore. Because now, globalization doesn't happen at the sector level. It happens at the level of specific production stages and specific occupations.
So wait, we aren't talking about offshoring the whole steel company anymore. We're talking about offshoring just the payroll department of the steel company.
Or just a graphic design team of a local marketing agency.
Wow.
Columbia University economist Jagdish Bhagwati coined a brilliant term for this: kaleidoscopic globalization.
Kaleidoscopic. I like that. It perfectly captures the chaos. A kaleidoscope is constantly shifting, breaking apart, and reordering itself into new patterns with every slight turn.
And the engine turning that kaleidoscope is computing power, which famously doubles every year or two under Moore's law.
Right, the tech is just moving so fast.
Because the technology driving this is advancing so rapidly, the impacts of the new globalization are sudden and entirely uncontrollable.
So a new advancement in communication software might make it perfectly viable to offshore basic data entry this month.
Yes, but next year an advancement in AI or secure data transfer might make it possible to offshore complex legal research or, medical diagnostics.
You can no longer look at your specific job or your stage of production and confidently declare it safe from global competition.
It's impossible to predict. It's a constant high-stakes roll of the dice based on technological leaps you can't control.
And this leads to a major societal consequence, doesn't it? The completely ruptured compact between G7 workers and G7
The
firms.
social contract is broken.
Because historically there was a contract. When engineering or technology in a nation advanced, the workers in that specific nation reaped the benefits.
Right. If a German engineering firm created a faster, more efficient machine, the German workers operating that machine became more productive.
And consequently, their wages went up. The technology, the capital, and the labor were inextricably linked by national borders.
But that social compact is now ruptured. Today, a German firm can take that brilliant proprietary German technology and seamlessly combine it with Polish labor.
The workers in the home country are no longer the exclusive, guaranteed beneficiaries of their own country's technological and intellectual advances.
Competitiveness is no longer about the nation. It's entirely about the firm.
The firm operates globally, mixing and matching national advantages they might use, German engineering tech, American marketing strategies, and Chinese assembly labor.
All to create the most cost-effective product possible. And this completely upends how governments should be operating. The analysis strongly suggests that governments need to abandon the strategy of trying to build entire vertically integrated supply chains domestically.
So trying to keep every single step of the process within your borders is just a 19th century strategy in a 21st century world.
Exactly. Instead, governments need to focus heavily on joining international value chains. The goal is to make your workforce the absolute best in the world at one highly specific piece of the puzzle.
Rather than trying to clumsily build the entire puzzle from scratch.
Right.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I have to be honest, framing it this way sounds deeply terrifying.
It can be, yes.
If I'm a worker today, I am no longer just competing with the person across town for a promotion or even another company in my state. I can't even rely on my own country's overall technological edge to protect my salary or my standard of living.
It's unsettling.
I am just a single vulnerable piece in a constantly shifting kaleidoscope.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it certainly introduces a high level of unpredictability into career planning. But it is not a universally bleak picture.
Okay, where's the silver lining?
It also creates unprecedented opportunities. It means that talent, efficiency, and innovation are recognized and rewarded on a truly global scale.
So if you possess a highly specialized skill, your market is no longer your zip code, it's the entire planet.
Exactly. But what this environment absolutely demands is adaptability. It requires individuals and governments to adapt continuously rather than stubbornly relying on outdated nationalist industrial policies.
Policies that falsely assume physical borders can still protect jobs the way they did 50 years ago.
Right. We have to play the game that actually exists today, not the nostalgic game that existed in 1980.
So we've unbundled physical goods with steamships, and we've unbundled complex ideas with fiber optic cables. But we still have that third stubborn constraint hanging out there, the high cost of moving people.
A final frontier.
Where is this all heading? What happens to the global economy when that final constraint finally falls?
The text leaves us with a compelling prediction for exactly that scenario, calling it the third unbundling.
The third unbundling.
The cost of moving people, or more accurately, the cost of moving the services of people, is positioned to be the next major economic constraint to plunge.
And how does that happen?
It will likely happen through two rapidly advancing technologies, telepresence and telerobotics.
Telepresence. Now, we aren't just talking about a standard video call here, are we?
Far beyond that, it envisions seamless, high-fidelity virtual immigration. It's the ability to provide complex brain services across the globe with such zero-latency precision that it feels as though you are physically sitting in the room with your colleagues.
It completely removes the friction of remote work.
Completely. And then you have telerobotics, which pushes this into the physical realm, substituting for manual labor.
Wait, really? Manual labor?
Yes. Imagine a highly trained Japanese engineer repairing a complex manufacturing machine in South Africa, not by flying there, but by piloting a robotic arm from a desk in Tokyo.
Oh, wow. So they aren't just sending their ideas or their designs, they are actively sending their physical, real-time actions across the world.
The third unbundling will completely unbundle labor services from the physical laborers themselves. You will no longer have to move the person to get the precise physical or intellectual work of the person.
Which brings us to a truly provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up today. We spend an enormous amount of our political and social energy fiercely debating physical borders,
Constantly.
physical immigration policies, and physical supply chains. We argue endlessly about walls and travel visas.
But if this third unbundling fully materializes,
If virtual immigration becomes cheap and flawless through telepresence and telerobotics, then physical walls simply won't protect local service economies anymore.
they won't mean a thing.
Imagine your local hospital employing a robotic surgical arm operated by someone in a completely different time zone who earns a fraction of the local wage. Or imagine a construction site where the heavy machinery is piloted by a virtual immigrant sitting thousands of miles away.
It's entirely possible.
If the physical location of the worker no longer matters for either intellectual or manual labor, what happens to the very concept of a local economy?
It forces us to completely reevaluate what community and local commerce even mean in a hyper-connected world.
It's a staggering thought. The Great Convergence isn't a historical event that ended in the 2000s. It might just be entering its most disruptive and intimate phase yet. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking past the obvious, and we will catch you next time.